Here is the front of a Bugatti Chiron Sport, and here is the rear half of a Bugatti Chiron Sport, and today we've got to connect both of them together.
A $3 million hypercar, a manufacturer that declared it dead, and one YouTuber with a garbage can who refused to accept that verdict. When Bugatti locked the identification number on a wrecked Chiron Sport, the message was unmistakable. This car was never touching a road again without the factory in France. The company's own CEO said certain repairs required equipment found at only 2 facilities on the planet. Matt Armstrong heard that, looked at a salvage yard wreck most people would have walked away from, and decided the only reasonable response was to start taking it apart anyway. What happened next became one of the strangest standoffs in modern automotive history. The Bugatti that refused to stay dead. Every great rebuild story starts with a car nobody else wanted, and this one started with one of the rarest hypercars on the planet. The Bugatti Chiron Sport exists in a production run of just 60 units. Worldwide, a vehicle so exclusive that losing even one to a crash meaningfully shrinks the entire population of cars that will ever exist. This particular sport belonged to fellow content creator Alex Gonzalez, and it was damaged badly enough during an incident that insurance ultimately paid out and the car landed on a Copart salvage listing, the kind of place where wrecked vehicles go to either be parted out or rescued by someone determined enough to try. Matt Armstrong is exactly that kind of someone. Over the course of his career, he had built a YouTube following exceeding 3 million subscribers by doing precisely this: buying wrecked exotic and high-performance cars at salvage prices.
Today, we're about to attempt what Bugatti think is impossible,
And bringing them back to life on camera, turning what would otherwise be a quiet insurance write-off into a documented, often improbable, journey back to the road. Lamborghinis, McLarens, various Porsches. He had tackled plenty of difficult projects before. But a Bugatti Chiron Sport operates on a different scale entirely, and Armstrong knew it from the moment he heard about the car sitting in Miami. He didn't wait around. He booked a flight, crossed the Atlantic, and went to inspect the wreck in person before it could disappear further into the insurance and salvage pipeline. What he found when he got there was sobering even by the standards of someone used to assessing crash damage for a living. The front end had absorbed a serious impact, with deployed airbags, cracked carbon fiber bodywork, destroyed headlights, and a twisted front structure. Bugatti's own technician, flown in directly from France to assess the car, looked it over and declared it a total loss. Repair estimates for replacement parts alone climbed to roughly $1.7 million, a number that on its own would be enough to end most rebuild projects before they ever began. Then came the part of this story that turned a difficult repair into something closer to a corporate standoff. Bugatti didn't simply walk away from the car. The manufacturer locked the vehicle's identification number, a move that meant no authorized Bugatti dealer anywhere in the world could legally sell replacement parts for that specific car. Why would a manufacturer go that far for a vehicle it had already written off? The answer comes down to liability and brand protection. A Chiron traveling at its top speed experiences forces that would tear apart almost any other production car on the road. And Bugatti's position was that any structural weakness introduced by an unauthorized repair could prove genuinely catastrophic, not just to the car, but to whoever happened to be driving it. From a corporate risk perspective, the logic is hard to argue with. From the perspective of a salvage owner who simply wanted his car back on the road, it looked like a wealthy manufacturer slamming a door shut on a problem it considered beneath its concern. That single decision reframed the entire situation. This was no longer simply a question of whether Armstrong could rebuild a badly damaged car.
The Bugatti Chiron Sport. Possibly the biggest rebuild I'm about to take on.
It became a question of whether he could rebuild a car that its own manufacturer had specifically engineered every available channel to prevent from failures, ever being repaired outside of its own factory. Every bolt, every bracket, every sensor that needed replacing now had to be sourced through improvisation rather than a parts catalog, because the catalog itself had been closed to this particular vehicle. Is it any wonder that a project starting from that position generated this much attention? Most salvage rebuilds face financial and mechanical obstacles. This one faced a manufacturer actively working to make the rebuild impossible. There's a broader context worth understanding here, because the financial mathematics behind a project like this rarely make headlines on their own, yet they shape everything about why a rebuild this difficult was even worth attempting in the first place. Salvage Bugattis essentially never appear on the open market, and when they do, even heavily damaged examples tend to draw bidding well into six figures simply because of how rare the underlying platform is. A Chiron per sport that originally retailed in the millions doesn't lose its fundamental rarity just because it's been in an accident. 60 units were ever produced, full stop, and that number doesn't change regardless of how any individual car's story unfolds afterward. For a creator whose entire channel concept depends on finding cars worth the audience's attention, a project this rare and this difficult was always going to generate outsized interest, long before anyone knew how the standoff with Bugatti would eventually play out. It's also worth pausing on just how unusual it is for a hypercar rebuild to happen in full public view at all. Traditionally, a wrecked exotic at this level disappears quietly into either a factory repair program or a specialist body shop, with the entire process shielded from public visibility by confidentiality agreements, insurance privacy, and simple industry convention. Documenting every step of a Chiron rebuild on camera, mistakes and all, broke from that convention entirely, and that choice alone guaranteed this project would draw more scrutiny, both from fans and from Bugatti itself, than almost any comparable repair in recent memory. When Bugatti's CEO entered the fight, it didn't take long for the situation to escalate. Beyond a quiet disagreement between a YouTuber and a parts department, Bugatti CEO Mate Rimac took the unusual step of addressing the situation directly and publicly.
Can't do that in a garage. There's just a few places in the world with the right equipment and only a few people in the world with the right training to be able to do that.
Posting commentary on social media that pulled the entire saga into the kind of spotlight most salvage rebuilds never come close to receiving. Rimac didn't mince words about the scale of the challenge facing Armstrong's project. He pointed specifically to the damaged gearbox housing and the structural questions surrounding the car's carbon fiber monocoque, framing his concerns as a matter of basic engineering reality rather than corporate stubbornness. The most striking claim from Rimac centered on the process of physically splitting the Chiron's chassis into its front and rear sections, a step that would be necessary to access the damaged gearbox and transmission. According to Rimac, this particular procedure required specialized equipment available at only 2 facilities anywhere in the world. That's not a minor technical detail. That's a direct, public statement from the head of one of the most respected hypercar manufacturers on the planet, asserting that an entire category of repair was effectively beyond the reach of any independent workshop, regardless of skill or determination. Why would a CEO bother making that claim publicly, rather than simply letting the situation play out quietly? Part of the answer likely involves protecting the brand's reputation for engineering exclusivity. The idea that owning a Bugatti means owning something so sophisticated that only Bugatti itself can properly maintain it. There's also a genuine safety argument buried in there, one that deserves to be taken seriously rather than dismissed as pure corporate posturing. Rimac also pushed back specifically on claims circulating in some of Armstrong's videos about parts pricing. stating plainly that much of what people were hearing about Bugatti's service and repair costs simply wasn't accurate, and that prices referenced in certain videos had been inflated. Armstrong, for his part, didn't back down from the challenge. He acknowledged the gravity of what Bugatti was telling him, and in his own commentary made clear that he understood exactly why the manufacturer felt the way it did. He had never worked on a Bugatti before this project, by his own admission, and he wasn't pretending otherwise. But understanding a manufacturer's caution and accepting it as a reason to abandon the project turned out to be two very different things for Armstrong. His response amounted to a simple, defiant position. If Bugatti wouldn't help, he and his team would simply have to find their own way through it, regardless of how difficult that path turned out to be. What makes this confrontation so compelling?
In order for us to inspect this damage that's on the gearbox and even see if it's repairable, we've got to remove the engine. And to do so on a Bugatti, it means we have to separate the back end of the car from the front.
Isn't simply that a YouTuber disagreed with a car company. It's the specificity of the claim being challenged. Rimac didn't vaguely suggest the repair would be hard. He stated, on the record, that a specific procedure was achievable at only 2 locations on the entire planet. That's the kind of claim that either gets quietly walked back later or gets dramatically disproven in front of millions of viewers. There was no middle ground available once that statement had been made publicly, and everyone watching the saga unfold understood exactly what was at stake in whatever happened next. There's a particular kind of risk inherent in a CEO making a claim this specific in public, and it's worth sitting with for a moment why Rimac chose to do so anyway, rather than letting the dispute play out quietly through legal or corporate channels. Bugatti's broader brand depends heavily on the perception of being not just expensive, but genuinely unreachable, a tier of engineering so far beyond ordinary automotive work that comparing it to a typical repair shop project feels almost absurd on its face. Defending that perception publicly, even at the risk of being proven wrong on a narrow technical point, may have felt like the lesser risk compared to staying silent while an enormous online audience watched a YouTuber attempt exactly the kind of repair Bugatti insists requires its own factory's resources. That tension between defending a reputation and risking a very public, very specific rebuttal is part of what gives this entire saga its dramatic shape. Corporate statements about exclusivity and irreplaceability usually exist in the abstract. Broad claims about prestige and quality that are nearly impossible to test directly. Rimac's chassis-splitting claim wasn't abstract at all. It named a number, 2 facilities, and implicitly dared anyone outside those walls to prove otherwise. Few corporate statements in the automotive world have ever been quite this testable, and fewer still have ended up tested this directly, this publicly, and this definitively. The garbage can that proved Bugatti wrong. The moment Bugatti said it couldn't be done, the challenge stopped being about fixing a car. It became a battle over who gets to decide what's possible. A wrecked Bugatti Chiron Per Sport sat in pieces. The manufacturer had locked the VIN. Parts were blocked. Repair channels were closed. And then Bugatti's own CEO made a statement that echoed across the automotive world. According to him, one of the most critical procedures on the entire car, splitting the chassis to access major components, could only be performed at 2 facilities on Earth. 2 facilities. Not a specialist workshop, not an experienced independent mechanic. 2 places on the entire planet. For most people, that would have been the end of the story. But for Matt Armstrong, it became the beginning. Because instead of accepting the claim, he decided to test it. And what happened next sounded so absurd that many people refused to believe it at first. There was no multi-million-dollar factory equipment, no Bugatti-approved tooling, no secret engineering laboratory. Instead, Armstrong called in the person he trusted most, his father. Together, inside an ordinary workshop, they studied the problem that one of the world's most exclusive manufacturers claimed required resources almost nobody else possessed. Then they came up with a solution: a vehicle lift, a few improvised supports, and the wheeled base from an ordinary garbage can. That was it. The contrast was almost impossible to ignore. On one side stood a company whose name represents the absolute peak of automotive engineering, a manufacturer that builds some of the fastest, most expensive, and most technologically advanced cars ever created. On the other side stood a YouTuber, his father, and a trash can. Yet when the moment arrived, the impossible happened. The chassis separated. The procedure worked. And one of the most specific claims ever made by a hypercar manufacturer had suddenly been challenged in full public view. But that was only the beginning. Because splitting the car apart was one thing. Putting it back together was something else entirely. Every missing component became a puzzle. Every broken system became an obstacle. And every obstacle came with the same problem. Bugatti wasn't helping. The team needed airbags. They discovered that components from an Audi could work. They needed cooling system parts. They engineered their own solutions.
If you need to top your coolant up, you have to remove the whole rear hatch to do so. The goal was to get the quarters off, but I am going to try and get this wing off, so it just gives us a bit more leeway, and I think I can get that off in this position now.
They needed an exhaust system. Specialists stepped in and built one from scratch. Even some of the supposedly exotic hardware hidden inside a multi-million-dollar Bugatti turned out to be surprisingly ordinary. The deeper they went, the more surprising the discoveries became. What looked from the outside like an untouchable machine slowly revealed itself to be something else entirely. A machine. Complex, brilliant, extraordinary, but still a machine. One that could be understood, one that could be repaired, and maybe, just maybe, one that didn't require permission from the factory to survive. Yet every victory created a new challenge. Sensors failed. Components were damaged during reassembly. Tiny mistakes threatened months of progress. At several points, the entire project appeared to be hanging by a thread, and through it all, one question kept growing larger. What would happen if they actually succeeded? What would it mean if a group of independent mechanics, fabricators, and specialists accomplished what one of the most prestigious manufacturers in the world had publicly suggested was nearly impossible? Because this story was never just about a Bugatti. It was about control, ownership, repair, and whether determination can overcome a system designed to say no. The farther the project progressed, the more the stakes changed. This was no longer a rebuild. It was becoming a test of an entire philosophy. And before it was over, even Bugatti itself would be forced to pay attention. The moment Bugatti was proven wrong. After the chassis was split, the gearbox addressed, and a long list of improvised repairs completed across the interior, the airbags, the cooling system, and the exhaust. The moment of truth arrived, the way it always does in a rebuild story like this, with the team holding their breath to see whether the car would actually start. Reconnecting a hypercar's coolant, fuel, intercooler, and ECU systems after this level of disassembly is never simple, and there was genuine uncertainty about whether the cooling system had suffered lasting damage, since the car had been driven without coolant during the original accident. When the engine finally turned over and caught, the reaction was exactly what you'd expect after months of improvised, against-the-odds work. The new custom exhaust gave the car a deeper, throatier sound than it ever produced from the factory. A fitting exclamation point on a rebuild defined from the start by doing things differently than Bugatti's own engineers would have chosen. The car wasn't fully roadworthy yet, but the central question hanging over the project for months had finally been answered. The engine Bugatti's own technician had declared part of a total loss was running again, powered by a transmission split using a garbage can rather than factory tooling. Think about what that means. The CEO who had locked this car's parts access and stated splitting the chassis required equipment found at only 2 Facilities worldwide had been watching as a YouTuber, and his father proved that claim wrong using a workshop lift and a piece of trash can hardware. What happened next added nuance to a story that could easily have ended in pure corporate embarrassment. Rather than digging in further, Bugatti's position appeared to soften over time. Rimac extended an offer suggesting Armstrong would be welcome at the Molsheim, France facility, and repair estimates reportedly came down from their original eye-watering figures. Did Armstrong's documented success in clearing obstacles Bugatti called insurmountable play a role in that shift? It's a reasonable question, even if Bugatti never framed it as a response to being proven wrong. Even after the engine fired up, the saga wasn't entirely free of drama. Eagle-eyed viewers spotted what appeared to be a hairline crack and flagged it to Armstrong, raising fresh anxiety about whether Bugatti's structural concerns were materializing after all. The relief, when those crack rumors were shown to be unfounded, says something about how closely this project was being watched. The car's first test drive carried symbolic weight beyond the mechanical milestone itself. A vehicle a Bugatti technician had declared completely lost was now moving under its own power, propelled by a transmission accessed through a procedure the CEO had insisted was confined to 2 facilities worldwide. The central question driving the saga had been answered in the most public way imaginable. When Bugatti met the YouTube-era strip, away the specific details of one wrecked Chiron Per Sport.
The Bugatti Chiron Per Sport. Possibly the biggest rebuild I'm about to take on.
And this story becomes a window into a tension that's likely to keep intensifying as hypercar ownership intersects more with online content creation. Manufacturers like Bugatti have historically operated under the assumption that vehicles at this level of complexity simply cannot, and should not, be touched by anyone outside their own authorized service network. That assumption made perfect sense before YouTube rebuild channels existed. When a wrecked exotic car quietly disappeared into a body shop or a scrapyard with no audience watching at all, that era is clearly over. Armstrong's channel, along with a growing number of creators tackling increasingly ambitious salvage projects, has built audiences in the millions, specifically by documenting exactly the kind of repair work manufacturers would prefer happened quietly or not all. When that documentation includes a CEO making a specific, falsifiable claim about what's achievable outside the factory, and that claim then gets tested and disproven on camera in front of an enormous audience, the tension isn't simply embarrassing for one executive. It's a preview of a broader reckoning facing manufacturers across the entire luxury and hypercar segment. Should manufacturers be required to support independent repairs on vehicles they've already declared total losses, given ownership has fully transferred away from their control? Reasonable people land in different places on that question. Bugatti's safety concerns about structural integrity at extreme speeds aren't manufactured excuses. They reflect genuine engineering realities. At the same time, a manufacturer's reluctance to support independent repair can shade into something that looks less like safety advocacy and more like an attempt to maintain tight control over every vehicle bearing its badge. What seems clear, regardless of where anyone lands on that debate, is that the old assumption of total manufacturer control has been meaningfully challenged by what Armstrong's team accomplished. A garbage can and a determined father-son team didn't just get one hypercar running again. They demonstrated, publicly and undeniably, that at least some of the boundaries manufacturers draw around what's possible outside their own walls are softer than they initially appear. There's also a quieter lesson in how this standoff resolved itself, one that has less to do with garbage cans and chassis splits, and more to do with how institutions respond once they've been publicly tested and found.
I'm Andy Wallace, Bugatti test driver. Before we hand the Chiron over to our customers, it should be tested and approved by a champion.
At least partially, mistaken. Bugatti never issued a dramatic apology. or admitted its position had been wrong. What it did instead was simpler and more telling. It quietly softened its tone and left the door open, without ever connecting that shift to the specific claim that had just been disproven. For Armstrong, the lesson cuts differently. His channel exists on the premise that determination and a willingness to document failure alongside success can overcome obstacles that look insurmountable. Coming out the other side with a running, driving Chiron per sport validated an entire approach to craftsmanship that treats manufacturer gatekeeping as an obstacle to work around rather than a final word to accept. So that is the full story. Bugatti locked the parts, declared the car dead, and said only 2 facilities on the planet could split its chassis. Matt Armstrong and his father did it with a workshop lift and a garbage can. And by the time the engine roared back to life, the same CEO who called it impossible admitted he had quietly been watching the whole time. Bugatti never said it was wrong. It just softened and left the door open. If you came here for proof that determination can outwork a billion-dollar excuse, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment and tell us who won. Subscribe for more.